free, that is, disassociated with other things. It's quite an unusual feeling. Lee nodded as though Carson's words had confirmed some idea in his own mind. He turned toward the alcove and the metal disc in the floor. Carson followed him. The occultist moved close to the wall, tracing out the faded symbols with a long forefinger. He muttered something under his breath, words that sounded like gibberish to Carson. He swung about, his face grim and pale. "I've seen enough," he said softly. "Shall we go?" Surprised, Carson nodded and led the way back into the cellar. Upstairs, Lee hesitated, as though finding it difficult to broach his subject. At length, he asked, "Mr. Carson, would you mind telling me if you have had any peculiar dreams lately?" Carson stared at him, mirth dancing in his eyes. "Dreams?" he repeated. "Oh, I see. Well, Mr. Lee, I may as well tell you that you can't frighten me. Your compatriots, the other cultists I've entertained, have already tried it." Lee raised his thick eyebrows. "Yes, did they ask you whether you'd dreamed?" "Several did, yes." "And you told them?" "No." Then, as Lee leaned back in his chair, a puzzled expression on his face, Carson went on slowly. "Although, really, I'm not quite sure." "You mean?" "I think... I have a vague impression that I have dreamed lately, but I can't be sure. I can't remember anything of the dream, you see. And, very probably your brother occultist put the idea into my mind." "Perhaps," Lee said noncommittally, getting up. He hesitated. "Mr. Carson, I'm going to ask you a rather presumptuous question. Is it necessary for you to live in this house?" Carson sighed resignedly. "When I was first asked that question, I explained that I wanted a quiet place to work on a novel, and that any quiet place would do. But it isn't easy to find him. Now that I have this witch room and I'm turning out my work so easily, I see no reason why I should move, and perhaps upset my program. I'll vacate this house when I finish my novel, and then you occultists can come in and turn it into a museum or do whatever you want with it. I don't care. But until the novel is finished, I intend to stay here." Lee rubbed his chin. "Indeed, I can understand your point of view. But is there no other place in the house where you can work?" He watched Carson's face for a moment and then went on swiftly. "I don't expect you to believe me. You are a materialist. Most people are. But there are a few of us who know that above and beyond what men call science, there is a greater science that is built on laws and principles which, to the average man, would be almost incomprehensible. If you had read Machen, you will remember that he speaks of the gulf between the world of consciousness and the world of matter. It is possible to bridge that gulf. The witch room is such a bridge. Do you know what a whispering gallery is?" "Eh?" Carson said, staring. "But there's an analogy. Merely an analogy. A man may whisper a word in a gallery or a cave, and if you are standing in a certain spot 100 feet away, you will hear that whisper, although someone 10 feet away will not. It's a simple trick of acoustics, bringing the sound to a focal point, and this principle can be applied to other things besides sound, to any wave impulse, even to thought." Carson tried to interrupt, but Lee kept on. "That black stone in the center of your witch room is one of those focal points. The design on the floor, when you sit on the black circle there, you are abnormally sensitive to certain vibrations, certain thought commands, dangerously sensitive. Why do you suppose your mind is so clear when you are working there? A deception, a false feeling of lucidity. For you are merely an instrument, a microphone, tuned to pick up certain malign vibrations, the nature of which you could not comprehend." Carson's face was a study in amazement and incredulity. "But you don't mean you actually believe?" Lee drew back, the intensity fading from his eyes, leaving them grim and cold. "Very well, but I've studied the history of your Abigail Prim. She too understood this super science of which I speak. She used it for evil purposes. The black art, as it is called. I have read that she cursed Salem in the old days, and a witch's curse can be a frightful thing. Will you—" He got up, gnawing at his lip. "Will you at least allow me to call on you tomorrow?" Almost involuntarily, Carson nodded. "But I'm afraid you'll be wasting your time. I don't believe— I have no—" He stumbled at a loss for words. "I merely wish to assure myself that you— Oh, another thing. If you dream tonight, will you try to remember the dream? If you attempt to recapture it immediately after waking, it is often possible to recall it." "All right, if I dream." That night, Carson dreamed. He awoke just before dawn with his heart racing furiously and a curious feeling of uneasiness. Within the walls and from below, he could hear the furtive scurryings of the rats. He got out of bed hastily, shivering in the cold grayness of early morning. A wan moon still shone faintly in a paling sky. Then he remembered Lee's words. He had dreamed. There was no question of that. But the content of his dream, that was another matter. He absolutely could not recall it to his mind, much as he tried, although there was a very vague impression of running frantically in darkness. He dressed quickly, and because the stillness of early morning in the old house got on his nerves, went out to buy a newspaper. It was too early for shops to be open, however, and in search of a newsboy he set off westward, turning at the first corner. And as he walked, a curious and inexplicable feeling began to take possession of him. A feeling of familiarity. He had walked here before, and there was a dim and disturbing familiarity about the shapes of the houses, the outline of the roofs. But, and this was the fantastic part of it, to his knowledge, he had never been on this street before. He had spent little time walking about this region of Salem, for he was indolent by nature. Yet there was this extraordinary feeling of remembrance, and it grew more vivid as he went on. He reached a corner, turned unthinkingly to the left. The odd sensation increased. He walked on slowly, pondering. No doubt he had traveled by this way before, and very probably he had done so in a brown study, so that he had not been conscious of his route. Undoubtedly, that was the explanation. Yet as Carson turned into Charter Street, he felt a nameless, uneasy waking within him. Salem was rousing. With daylight impassive, Polish workers began to hurry past him toward the mills. An occasional automobile went by. Before him, a crowd was gathered on the sidewalk. He hastened his steps, conscious of a feeling of impending calamity. With an extraordinary sense of shock, he saw that he was passing the Charter Street burying ground, the ancient, evilly famous burying point. Hastily, he pushed his way into the crowd. Comments in a muffled undertone came to Carson's ears, and a bulky, blue-clad back loomed up before him. He peered over the policeman's shoulder and caught his breath in a horrified gasp. A man leaned against the iron railing that fenced the old graveyard. He wore a cheap, gaudy suit, and he gripped the rusty bars in a clutch that made the muscles stand out in ridges on the hairy back of his hands. He was dead, and on his face, staring up at the sky at a crazy angle, was frozen an expression of abysmal and utterly shocking horror. His eyes, all whites, were bulging hideously. His mouth was a twisted, mirthless grin. A man at Carson's side turned a white face toward him. "Looks as if he was scared to death," he said somewhat hoarsely. "I'd hate to have seen what he saw. Ugh, look at that face." Mechanically, Carson backed away, feeling an icy breath of nameless things chill him. He rubbed his hand across his eyes, but still that contorted, dead face swam in his vision. He began to retrace his steps, shaken and trembling a little. Involuntarily, his glance moved aside, resting on the tombs and monuments that dotted the old graveyard. No one had been buried there for over a century, and the lichen-stained tombstones with their winged skulls, fat-cheeked cherubs, and funeral urns seemed to breathe out an indefinable miasma of antiquity. what had frightened the man to death. Carson drew a deep breath. True, the corpse had been a frightful spectacle, but he must not allow it to upset his nerves. He could not. His novel would suffer. Besides, he argued grimly to himself, the affair was obvious enough in its explanation. The dead man was apparently a Pole, one of the group of immigrants who dwell about Salem Harbor. Passing by the graveyard at night, a spot about which eldritch legends had clung for nearly 3 centuries, his drink-befuddled eyes must have given reality to the hazy phantoms of a superstitious mind. These Poles were notoriously unstable emotionally, prone to mob hysteria and wild imaginings. The great immigrant panic of 1853, in which 3 witch houses had been burned to the ground, had grown from an old woman's confused and hysterical statement that she had seen a mysterious, white-clad foreigner take off his face. What else could be expected of such people, Carson thought. Nevertheless, he remained in a nervous state and did not return home until nearly noon. When on his arrival he found Lee, the occultist, waiting, he was glad to see the man and invited him in with cordiality. Lee was very serious. "Did you hear about your friend Abigail Prynne?" he asked without preamble, and Carson stared, pausing in the act of siphoning charged water into a glass. After a long moment, he pressed the lever, sent the liquid sizzling and foaming into the whiskey. He handed Lee the drink and took one himself, neat, before answering the question. "I don't know what you're talking about. What's she been up to?" he asked with an air of forced levity. "I've been checking up on the records," Lee said, "and I find Abigail Prynne was buried on December 14th, 1690, in the Charter Street burying ground, with a stake through her heart. What's the matter?" "Nothing," Carson said tonelessly. Well, her grave's been opened and robbed, that's all. The stake was found uprooted nearby, and there were footprints all around the grave. Shoe prints. Did you dream last night, Carson?" Lee snapped out the question, his gray eyes hard. "I don't know," Carson said confusedly, rubbing his forehead. "I can't remember. I was at the Charter Street graveyard this morning." "Oh, then you must have heard something about the man who—" "I saw him," Carson interrupted, shuddering. "It upset me." He downed the whiskey at a gulp. Lee watched him. "Well," he said presently, "are you still determined to stay in this house?" Carson put down the glass and stood up. "Why not?" he snapped. "Is there any reason why I shouldn't? Huh?" "After what happened last night?" "After what happened? A grave was robbed. A superstitious Pole saw the robbers and died of fright. Well?" "You're trying to convince yourself," Lee said calmly. "In your heart you know. You must know the truth. You've become a tool in the hands of tremendous and terrible forces, Carson. For 3 centuries, Abby Prynne has lain in her grave, undead, waiting for someone to fall into her trap, the witch room. Perhaps she foresaw the future when she built it, foresaw that someday someone would blunder into that hellish chamber and be caught by the trap of the mosaic pattern. It caught you, Carson, and enabled that undead horror to bridge the gulf between consciousness and matter, to get en rapport with you. Hypnotism is child's play to a being with Abigail Prynne's frightful powers. She could very easily force you to go to her grave and uproot the stake that held her captive, and then erase the memory of that act from your mind so that you could not remember it even as a dream." Carson was on his feet, his eyes burning with a strange light. "In God's name, man,